Is the woke media finally getting the comeuppance it deserves, thanks to Bari Weiss and the Free Press? Weiss just sold her Substack newsletter for $150 million to media mogul David Ellison, who owns Paramount Skydance. Free Press is being integrated into Paramount, and as part of the deal, Weiss is being made editor-in-chief of all things CBS News. In the world of media and journalism, this is a very big deal. So is this a fitting payback for years of liberal bias from legacy media? And is this a sign of a major shift in the media business under Trump? Welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your libertarian review of news and culture from the editors of Reason magazine. I am Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and very special guest, Eric Boehm. Happy shutdown week again. All right, so there's a twist here developing today, which is that Bari Weiss might end up in charge of more than just CBS, because David Ellison is also looking to buy Warner Brothers, and that would mean he owns CNN. So there's already speculation that Ellison might combine CBS with CNN and put Bari Weiss in charge of all of it. That is an empire. That is a total revolution in news media. So, Katherine, I want to start with you. Is Bari Weiss the woke media's reckoning?
I don't know what that means. I mean, I'm really happy for Bari. Feels like she has hustled and she has won, and props to her for that. I think my initial response to this is that it's a little bit of a sign how much CBS has fallen. This kind of thing just wouldn't have been possible in the age that came before, when the sort of big legacy networks were untouchable in a way that they are not now. It has to me the same texture as the kind of like Daily Beast and Newsweek moment, where you're not kind of sure whether the young thing swallowed the old thing and how much there was to swallow. But props to Bari, and congratulations to her.
Nick, I just want to ask you kind of the same question. Is this mostly about woke? I mean, even before the sale, the Free Press's success has been at least portrayed as a major backlash to woke media, a kind of revenge of the audience against a media that just left their interests behind, that didn't have any kind of common sense or sense of what normal, everyday people were like or were interested in, particularly when it comes to issues surrounding gender, free speech, race, that sort of thing. Does that narrative make sense to you? And do you think that that is sort of what is happening with the sale?
I think the success of the Free Press, which went from 0 subscribers, 5 or 6 years ago, to 1.5 million paying subscribers, according to them on Substack, that is a testament not just to being anti-woke, but to being kind of mainstream and interested in reporting and a wider range of viewpoints than the New York Times was serving, where Bari had worked and famously left in a kind of snit at, right around the time of the lockdowns and whatnot. I don't know that it says that much about CBS News, which is a hulking, rotted out legacy media, the Tiffany network, which has been in third place for a long time now among the major networks, or fourth place, effectively. Fox News has, fits in there somewhere, but not fully. But as I was thinking about this, people were like, oh, do you remember when 60 Minutes, which is the jewel in the crown of the Tiffany network, which is a rotting hulk of a battleship that is sinking to the bottom of the ocean, et cetera.
I love this metaphor.
When is the last time anybody here watched 60 Minutes when it was on? Before the show, I went to look at it and they had a profile of Rob Reiner. And I am more interested in Rob Reiner as a figure, as a baby boomer. I remember him as Meathead. I know that he directed Spinal Tap and the sequel is finally out and all of that. And you would have to pay me $200 a month to watch Rob Reiner on 60 Minutes. And that's not the worst thing that they've done.
You can get a lot of Substacks for $200 a month.
But here is what, Weiss in her, Bari in her note to Free Press people said today, there are enormous numbers of smart, politically mixed, pragmatic Americans, the people who believe unapologetically in the American project. This is the actual mainstream, and they are being ill-served. If she brings that sensibility to CBS News, CBS will move from the cellar at least to the first floor, maybe the second floor, maybe the penthouse of American legacy news media. It'll be hard. It'll be interesting. I think it's a good thing overall. And it also shows something that is constantly true. the media is always falling apart and regrouping. And at any moment, if you go back and you look in 1970 and you say, oh, there were the three networks and Walter Cronkite, blah, 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 everything was set in stone. Even then, there was an immense amount of churn, and there were all kinds of underground publications that were coming up and speaking to people who had never been reached before. So this is part and parcel of that. What is different is that Bari built something really good at the Free Press and something that, reached an underserved market. If she brings, interesting journalism to CBS, we'll all be better off.
Do you think that that's going to happen, Nick? I mean, one of the criticisms here from Bari Weiss is obviously a polarizing figure. There are a lot of people out there who don't like her. I think she is obviously someone who is immensely talented as a media entrepreneur, just a very savvy marketer. What she has built, you just have to be impressed with it, kind of on a business level, especially in this incredibly difficult media ecosystem. At the same time, the Free Press is a newsletter business built on Substack. She has no experience in one of these major network newsrooms. Do you think that she is going to be able to sort of take her magic, what she was able to do with the Free Press, and apply that in a very different legacy media setting?
Yeah, I think it's quite possible. It's not certain by any stretch, but I think it's quite possible. And think of people, not perfect analogies, but look at somebody like Rupert Murdoch. When Rupert Murdoch, fled Australia and went back to England, everybody was like, this stupid Australian. My wife once got to ask him a question at an event, and she asked, what is the best insult you've ever received? And he said it was when somebody called him a kangaroo fucker. But this kangaroo fucker showed up in England, took over British media, then came to the U.S. and took over American media. So yeah, it can happen. Absolutely. Somebody with a point of view and with, ambition. Going to be really hard. When you say Bari is a polarizing figure, certainly in media, but I don't see anybody saying, what would be great is if she had stayed at the New York Times. The New York Times is super profitable, making more money for its stockholders and whatnot than it ever has. But nobody wants to be at the New York Times compared to being someplace else if it's growing. So yeah, I'd give her a real shot, but it's going to be difficult, and the odds are probably against her because most organizations don't come back. But here's hoping.
So on the polarizing front, I mean, so she obviously left the New York Times it's sort of with this big send-off letter that got a lot of press. It was covered in the New York Times, but also places like Politico. And after that happened, I just remember this was probably summer of 2021, so a year or so after she left. It might have been 2022. I was standing in line at the E Street movie theater, which I believe is now closed here in DC. It's a kind of art house movie theater, and I was standing in line to get a beer before I went into my movie, and the two women behind me were just. They spent 10 minutes talking shit about Bari Weiss. That was the only, yes, because I was in Washington, D.C.
Et cetera. The media, according to Gallup, is, trust and confidence in the media is at 28%. It's the lowest they've ever recorded. Pretty much nowhere to go but up.
All right. So since she worked at the New York Times and since she quit in the summer of 2020, Eric, I want to ask you, is this maybe not just about woke, but about COVID and about George Floyd and just the summer of 2020 and all of that insanity and the way that it will not leave us alone? And we are still living in the world that was created by, May through August of 2020 and all of the insanity that happened then?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, right? Like any large event that changes the course of history, you're going to have consequences that you can't predict. I mean, who would have thought that you'd go from COVID or George Floyd or that whole mess, Tom Cotton writing a op-ed in the New York Times to Bari Weiss running CBS News, and who knows, maybe CNN or whatever comes after this, right? There's all these consequences. I think it's kind of to Nick's point though about it's impossible to know whether she's going to succeed at this because it really is a very different job. And it's a little bit like, I love sports, so I'll analogize this to sports. It's a little bit like when you have great players that then after their career move into, being managers or being front office people or being announcers, right? Alex Rodriguez is a terrible baseball announcer. He was a great baseball player. Ryan Sandberg was one of the best second basemen of all time. He was a very middling to poor manager when he was the Phillies manager for a few years at least. And it's just because it's a different skill set. They're related, obviously, but there's different things there. Running CBS News is not going to be like running the the free press. And to Katherine's and Nick's points, I wish her well. I think the other thing I'll mention here that we haven't talked about yet is this morning, she sent out a letter that very quickly made it onto the internet to all of the employees at CBS News, outlining 10 what she called core journalistic values that will define what CBS News does. I won't read them all here, but they're good. Like, by and large, this is, she says, number one is journalism that reports on the world as it actually is. Again, I would hope like all journalists that are showing up to work every day are interested in doing that, but maybe some of them aren't. So if there's a focus on that, that's good. Journalism that is fair, fearless, and factual, and on and on. Like, these are good principles, and if CBS News sticks to them, and if she's able to steer them in a direction that is followed, that these principles lead towards, then that's going to be good for everybody. However, I will say, on the other hand, the memo also mentions, like, I want to hear from you about what's working and what isn't, and your thoughts on how to make CBS News the most trusted. Which is going to be very, very difficult to do. It's a massive organization. You're not going to be able to hear from every single person. So
just
maybe
read the
maybe
comments.
But there's already some suggestions.
That'll tell you what to do.
Whether she's going to succeed or not, the one thing that we know for sure, and I don't particularly care about this, but if CBS News doesn't change, it will not get better. CBS News is also ran as a major news organization, right? Both on TV, online, and in print. So
when you say get better, what do you mean? Do you mean in terms of the type of content, the form of it? Do you mean the ideology, the worldview?
In terms of mattering. In terms of mattering.
Driving the conversation.
And that could take all sorts of forms. I'm just saying, like, right now, if I think I want to find out what's going on in the world, CBS News is somewhere below Crunchyroll on the number of services or platforms I'm going to be scrolling through.
There's only one way to go, then.
This is also a case. I mean, this is a very, very classic object lesson in why antitrust is the stupidest of all of our categories of law. Like, the media industry has repeatedly been subject to antitrust queries and inquiries of all kinds of, throughout history. And every time, the real answer is the old will die or be transmuted into something unrecognizable. The new will be born. I think definitely more than is healthy, and have probably talked on this podcast before about a Flash movie that came out 20 years ago online, which posited a dark future in which Googlezon and Newsbotster fight it out for supremacy and eventually merge into Epic, which is a single internet media organization
run by Bari Weiss.
And it's run by Bari Weiss. And you know what?
In the video, it is not run by Bari Weiss, but yes, that is now the future we're headed towards.
The New York Times does collapse into this thing. Obviously, AI is not it. There's all these things that happen, but in some fundamental way, it is both totally right and completely wrong in the exact same way that antitrust action against media organizations is always right and completely wrong.
Yeah, those women in the E Street movie theater line are going to be really upset today, I would imagine. Nick, speaking of people who are upset about this,
yeah,
I don't know, man. They're probably just there to see I don't even remember what I was saying. Some indie movie that nobody saw, right? That's what people love. The people who are mad about this are not just mad about Bari Weiss. I mean, some of them are. But there's also a kind of fear out there. We've talked about it on this show on the left about the changing nature of media ownership, where you have David Ellison buying Paramount and getting control of CBS, then bringing in the Free Press and combining these two and putting Bari Weiss in charge. Maybe he's also going to end up in charge of Warner Brothers and thus in charge of CNN. You also have Jeff Bezos, it's been a while at this point, but purchased the Washington Post and has made significant changes on the opinion page.
Which is going through massive restructuring.
Yeah. Which is, again, full disclosure, my wife works there. But you also have Elon Musk, who purchased X. You have this consortium of American businessmen who are at least perceived to be relatively Trump-friendly, including guys like Mark Andreessen, who have been reported or rumored to be taking over TikTok as part of the TikTok deal here. And so that really would be a kind of a revolution in media versus the situation we were in 10 years ago, and really the situation that we have all been in for the last 40 or 50 years. It is a big change, right?
I don't know that it is, to be quite honest. I mean, what you're talking about, the personnel have changed, and arguably the known political cast of the people who own stuff, but The people who have owned CBS News at various points, I don't know what their politics were. Rupert Murdoch is considered reliably right. It's not clear that he has, as a result of that, is the Wall Street Journal very different than what it was when he bought it. It's probably a better newspaper. It's a bigger newspaper. So I don't think so. And I would argue that fears of media consolidation, of ownership, have faded. They've receded from the beginning of this century when people were all aghast at the AOL Time Warner merger, which was going to destroy all that was good and decent. None of those companies really exist. Yeah, none of them exist in the way that they did.
All that's left is the money sprinkled along in Reston. That's all that remains of that merger. Somehow.
What has happened is as that went down the drain, it took a lot of the stupid fears of media consolidation and concentration of ownership with it, because 1,000 flowers are blooming. The one thing, and I'll just quickly add this, one of the big winners of this, and it's not like there's winners and losers really, but Substack, the platform that enabled the free press, as well as a bunch of other things, including Zetio or Zedio, however you pronounce it.
I believe it's Zeteo, but I could be mistaken.
Good. Yeah, let's just call it the Big Z, which is doing phenomenally well at Substack and may or may not be completely funded by Qatar, who may or may not be our greatest ally or our single biggest enemy. I don't know, but Substack also is the type of thing, development and Patreon for that matter, but not in quite as big a way. These have made us understand, I think made more people understand that media ownership worries were always a canard. What it's about is readership, and you don't get readership by forcing things down people's throats. You get readership by opening up and speaking to more populations, and that's got to be good in a democracy.
Yeah, and if you want to break this down into a left-right thing, which I think is probably not the right way to actually look at this, but if you do want to think about it that way, and as you said, Peter, there are these kind of right-leaning or right-coded characters that are starting to take over some of these media outlets. Honestly, there's a lesson here for people on the political left or people who are in media who see themselves as being on the left or speaking to the left, which is to kind of look at what made Fox News successful, where that came from, starting as an upstart and now becoming one of the dominant players. What made the free press successful? Although I have some quibbles with some of the ways the free press covered certain stories, but undeniably successful, very good at starting and being a startup news organization and being successful, and then selling out, which is what everybody wants to do when you become successful, right? There's a lesson there for the left to do that too. That if institutional hegemony is not going to continue to be a thing for the political left, then they're going to have to start to play the game the way the right has for a little while now in these spaces. And some on the right have been very successful at that.
Yeah, and ask the Vox founders, right?
Yeah, that was
Matt Iglesias and Ezra Klein, who had to leave their child, locked them out of the house, right? Yeah. Maybe that's
all children eventually did.
They did end up leaving, and both of them have been quite entrepreneurial in their
absolutely.
New roles.
But what I'm saying is the same thing with the Intercept.
The New York Times.
The Intercept. It's okay, you start with a certain thing, and then you're like, first thing we have to do is kill the old people, which
I think
I'm increasingly against. With every year that passes.
Stay tuned for what's going to happen
after
this podcast.
Person on this podcast, I'm going to assume that's in jest. But yeah, I think that the story you are telling here, Nick, and what we are all circling is that this is a story of competition. This is a story of a world in which some media outlets are not performing well as businesses. And because they are not performing well as businesses, that creates openings for other businesses to rise up and take their place and steal their mojo. And that's also being enabled by new technologies, new platforms, by businesses that are designed to make this easier, like Substack, like YouTube. And so this is, whether you like Bari Weiss, whether you dislike Bari Weiss, whether you have mixed feelings about the free press or not, like I said, I think it's really just obviously an incredible success story as a media business. Because it's so well targeted and so well thought out to sort of serve the needs of the readers that it is trying to serve. This is a world in which media competition is working. And the people who don't like what's happening, a lot of what they're saying is, I don't like competition and I don't think we should have competition. But this is what it looks like. And if you want to build your own thing, you can do that now. And there are plenty of examples of that. All right, we're going to take a break here and then we'll be back with more. You believe in limited government and you support organizations that champion the ideals of a free society. But have you ensured that your charitable giving will leave a lasting legacy of liberty? Without a plan in place, your charitable legacy could fade, or worse, be redirected to causes that don't align with your values. At Donors Trust, we help you secure your philanthropic vision for the long term. With a donor-advised fund, you can ensure that the groups you care about continue to receive support even beyond your lifetime. And unlike other donor-advised funds, Donors Trust respects your libertarian principles and ensures your charitable capital remains committed to advancing individual liberty. Your giving should reflect your values, not just today, but for years to come. Your vision, your values, your impact. Go to donorstrust.org/reason to ensure your philanthropy continues to champion liberty for generations to come. That's donorstrust.org/reason. All right. So in the last segment, I argued that a lot of the free press story started with the summer of 2020 and COVID and George Floyd. One thing that happened during the summer of 2020, after the George Floyd riots broke out, was that the New York Times pushed out opinion editor James Bennett after running Tom Cotton's op-ed titled "Send in the Troops." Well, that is what President Trump wants to do now. Donald Trump is sending in the troops, but they're not deploying to a foreign country. Trump's boots on the ground are right here in America in cities run by Democrats. So we've got Portland, we've got Chicago, it's added to the list of Washington, D.C., Los Angeles earlier. Katherine, is this legal? Is this necessary? Is this something we should be worried about?
I am very worried about this. As we said last week on the podcast, I think this is truly a new frontier in kind of executive overreach. If we were in a movie, this would be a beat in the movie showing the seriousness of the situation. And we're not in a movie, and so things are not so tidy and linear and all that. But I am worried about it. And I think that the kind of coming moment when the courts will decide if this is something the president can do by their lights is really, really important. And I don't know which way it's going to go. The courts
are already deciding that they can't.
Well,
there's an Oregon judge. In fact, I mean, we should just note this, right? There's a judge in Oregon who has basically said that Trump cannot deploy troops into Oregon from anywhere.
But that is going to be one of a flurry of rulings at the lower court level, at the state level. Eventually, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. Will that be binding? Will they rule on the merits? There's going to be a very complicated series of actions by the courts. The courts have been a bulwark, by and large, against Trump's overreach. And ideally, Congress would be doing something. But I think we can rule that out for the moment, and so that
Congress is barely even open.
Yes.
There's a government shutdown right now, and what Congress is doing is not ending the shutdown.
Congress is extremely busy doing actively nothing in a way that is prohibiting them from doing this.
And how upset are you that Congress is doing nothing and you don't really like it?
I'm so upset. All I want to do is be happy that nothing is happening in Washington and that maybe a bunch of people are getting fired. And I cannot be happy about it, Peter, because instead we have troops marching in to take the deep dish pizzas of America or whatever.
This is why Katherine Mangu-Ward
you don't want to get
things
between J.B. Pritzker and a deep dish pizza.
No ad hominem, Nick.
Yeah.
Okay, so J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, is suing the Trump administration over the efforts to deploy troops into Chicago. Like I said, there was a judge in Oregon who over the weekend expanded an order saying you can't take troops from anywhere and bring them into here. The judge's order said something like Trump was already in violation of this. That's not quite a quote, but it's very close. And here is what Trump advisor Stephen Miller said in response. Nick, he said that this was legal insurrection, and he said this is an organized terrorist attack on the federal government and its officers, and the deployment of troops is an absolute necessity to defend our personnel, our laws, our government, public order, and the republic, capital R, itself. And then he accused local leaders in Portland of refusing to help and basically enabling a rebellion against the federal government. What do you think of this, Nick?
I think Stephen Miller is one of the most reprehensible figures in the Trump administration. And at the end of this term, it's going to be great when he goes back to, when he starts selling Dinesh D'Souza DVDs out of the trunk of his car for a living. He is wrong. He's stoking.
I hope they're in 4K.
His rhetoric is so over the top and overheated, but it's wrong. First off, the judge is a Trump appointee, which is kind of a nice touch to this. And what she specifically said, I cannot pronounce her name, having read it multiple times, and I'm not going to try. And
Matt Welsh.
It's a suspiciously German-sounding name, so this is all in her favor, right? But what she said is that the law that Trump used to invoke bringing in National Guardsmen against the will of the governor, that he did not satisfy those conditions. It's not an emergency. There is not a civic breakdown. Just as a basis in fact, there is no crisis that demands National Guardsmen in Portland. And that sounds pretty good. I think Katherine is absolutely right. We have not come yet to the moment where Trump might have his Andrew Jackson moment. Jackson, who famously told the Supreme Court to go fuck off after they said, after they ruled in favor.
Probably is.
Oh, yeah. John Marshall, big swear, he knew how to swear like nobody's business. But when, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Cherokee, against being displaced. And Jackson said, I believe, Marshall has made its decision, or the Supreme Court has made its decision. Let's see it enforce it. This is the absolute Rubicon in the Trump second term. If the courts consistently rule against him and then he starts to contravene it, then we're talking, constitutional crisis. So far throughout his first term and this term, he has not, and I suspect that he won't, but that's the drama. Also,
we really are reaching the point where everyone in the country has now been called a terrorist by the administration. Like, we've just been slowly accumulating groups that have been labeled terrorists in some kind of rhetorical way or sometimes more formally. I think this week we got a couple of Cato staffers got put on the list of, terrorists or terrorist sympathizers.
Wait, do you want to say more about that?
There was a tweet.
Do you want to dox them?
Suggesting that perhaps by advocating against Donald Trump's immigration policies, certain Cato scholars were the reason for violence against ICE officers. And I think that there is, it's also
craziness.
Every illegal immigrant, everyone who's ever given an illegal immigrant a ride in a car, everyone who's participated in the drug trade in any way, shape, or form is a terrorist. Also, anyone who's ever said anything bad about the administration is a terrorist. Now, these are not all official legal acts, and sometimes they are proxies of proxies, right? This is not quite reached the Alien and Sedition Acts levels of formality. But as we have talked about many, many times at Reason, stuff that starts out as powers of the state in pursuit of the war on terror inevitably get used to prevent people from getting high or having sex, mostly, but also sometimes just from basic free speech.
Or expressing your opinions. That's
it's
where we're at now.
all because Trump won't release the Epstein files.
Let's see.
I mean, look, I don't even think that's necessarily completely facetious. It's probably not entirely what's going on here, but it does seem to me like some of the activity, some of the kind of push from the Trump administration in terms of the deploying the National Guard, in terms of just a bunch of the stuff they're doing, is an effort to get people to look elsewhere. Trump clearly doesn't want that to happen, and wants people to focus on other things. But I want to go back to something that Katherine just said.
If I may just real quick, the
ahead.
Trump administration also has crossed the level of bald-faced lying. J.D. Vance does this on a regular basis. Stephen Miller does. But Tom Homan, the borders are. He was on a Fox show where he literally said that 70% of the people, of the illegal immigrants that they pick up are criminals. And the exact opposite is true. According to U.S. government data that he oversees, 70% of the immigrants that have been arrested do not have a criminal conviction. So we have gotten to a point where there's the rhetorical, bombast and all of that kind of stuff. But then on basic factual points, Kevin Hassett, Trump's chief economic advisor, this morning I was watching TV and he said, since Trump took office this year, inflation is down 50%. And it is absolutely not true. It's like basically the same, and it's actually up a little bit from where it was a couple months ago. So we have gotten to a bizarre world where the government is not just lying like it normally does, but it's like, it is whatever they're huffing. It has a lot of, testosterone or monkey glands in it because it's just off the hook.
It's like government.
To be clear, we support legalizing all of those things.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. And also homegrown, no tariffs on monkey glands, all of that kind of stuff. But all I'm saying is...
We can't grow monkey glands here. We have to import them.
They shouldn't be required to get approved by the FDA.
As Trump wants to manifest a particular world and he keeps falling further and further short, instead of changing what he's doing, he's merely lying more and more. And the people around him have to do that as well.
Eric, I want to bring you in here since Nick mentioned the difficulty of ascertaining, coming to an agreement on basic truth. I just want to ask you, a huge amount of the justification that the Trump administration is putting out there for sending troops into Portland in particular is that Portland is this lawless, crazy war zone. And it's true that in years past, during COVID in particular, there was Antifa or Antifa-like, it's hard to just sort of even figure out what Antifa is enough to kind of fully ascribe it, to anything. But there was an awful lot of violence, of craziness, of rioting on the streets of Portland. So what is your sense of the reality on the ground now? And how might someone, you're a reporter, right? How might someone actually go about ascertaining what is happening outside of this immigration facility that is the center of the conflict? Is this something that might justify federal intervention?
No, and that's the baseline here.
But how would you determine what is happening?
I'll get to that. Is that for one, I've never been on the ground in Portland. I've literally never set foot in the city of Portland. If Reason would like to send me there, I'd be happy to go look at what's happening and report on it.
Very briefly interrupt and say Nancy Rommelman
has
just
been there.
filed a dispatch for us, so stay tuned for that.
She's been there. Zach Weissmuller has a wonderful new documentary out about some of the drug decriminalization issues in Oregon and what went wrong with all of that, which you should absolutely check out. It's a fantastic documentary. So there are ways to know what's actually going on there. But look, Stephen Miller isn't the one who's going to know what's going on there. And regardless of what the situation is, this is not, and I mean, Nick already said this is not a national emergency that requires a federal response or the deployment of National Guard troops. If anything, there's local law enforcement issues that maybe there are state law enforcement issues. There are other levels of government here that are responsible for maintaining law and order in Portland, Oregon. To the extent that we need someone to maintain law and order in Portland, Oregon, it's those entities that should be doing it. But this is what you're seeing over and over again from this administration. Is you're seeing the immediate escalation of things to national emergencies that are plainly not. What we import into this country is not a national emergency. People protesting outside of an ICE facility in Portland, Oregon is not a national security situation. It's not a national emergency. And unfortunately, we've gotten into this kind of rut at the federal level, especially of governing by emergency. And it's gotten worse since COVID, but it was certainly a problem before that, where we govern by emergencies. And when you do that long enough, everything becomes an emergency. And this administration is, I would say, they're taking advantage of it for sure. But I also think they just no longer meaningfully even see the distinction between what is and is not an emergency. If they feel they need to do something, then that thing must be an emergency. They're working backwards to get to explaining what an emergency is. And this leads us nowhere good. I second most of what Nick and Katherine said about we're coming up to what could be a very dangerous moment here once we get an actual court ruling on this case.
I want to ask Katherine, about that to close us out here. Just how dangerous is this moment? How do we describe it without going crazy, without hyperventilating here? Because you on last week's podcast, you said something I have never heard a libertarian magazine editor say before, which is, I'm more afraid of growing executive power than I am of growing spending, of growing government, of that sort of core measure of the size of government. We have right now a president who is using dubiously legal measures and lies to send troops into American cities. And then when the courts say you can't do that, we have his top advisor saying that's legal insurrection. And I don't know what we're going to do here, but certainly hinting maybe it's not what the courts said. You have Derek Thompson, pretty reasonable center-left guy, on Twitter saying, look, we shouldn't throw around terms like fascism. But, like when you have top advisors going around calling for an autocratic executive to suspend the judiciary and declare martial law, the whole don't call me a fascist thing loses its punch. That's a Derek Thompson quote. What do you make of this? How should we be talking about this if we are concerned, but also don't want to give in to the kind of, derangement and hysteria that has often marked Trump critics?
My deep, deep impulse is to always, always say it is probably not as bad as you think. And so I want to employ that impulse here. I want to say the courts will hold as they have in the past. I want to say the people will not tolerate certain types of overreach, which in the past has been true. I mean, Trump did lose re-election after his behavior in his first term, and I think that that's meaningful.
But then he won election again.
And so I think
because of Biden.
I totally understand both the people who say, oh my God, I can't believe you're just panicking now, and the people who say, no, it is still too soon to panic. And for me, this particular twist of sending in armed federal officials and National Guardsmen to cities on very, very thin pretexts. That's a line. To me, that's a line. And I just want to cut government, guys. I just want to get rid of the FCC. I'm just a nice girl who wants to get rid of the FCC and the EPA and the FDA and the Department of Commerce. I'm just a nice, normal girl. And I resent that I am being dragged away from that fun and important work that I've been doing for the last 20 years in order to have to freak out about boots on the ground in my city and so many other cities. But I am kind of freaked out. So here we are.
The kind of concerning thing here, too, on top of these other things, the worrying thing for me is that, how much of executive power is constrained just by norms rather than by actual, right? Like Congress, in theory, can do something, but is not. The courts, in theory, can do something and very well may try. But ultimately, it's kind of just up to the president to do what he's told by those other branches, and that I don't know if that's going to work when you have Stephen Miller talking the way he's talking.
But it was always norms, right?
It was always norms.
It was always norms.
Yes,
and so in this sense, the norms people are right. In the other sense, the norms people are stupid because you don't bring them back by just saying, oh my God, norms. But locks on your front door are not what keep robbers out. Norms of law and order and behavior and culture are what keep robbers out. And it is the same thing. The locks on the power of the executive were never what kept the executive from misbehaving. This is the I would like to see the Supreme Court enforce its order thing. It was always norms, but norms have been very powerful. Going back to old norms is hard. And maybe this is similar to the kind of CBS thing at the top of this show, right? Restoring the greatness of a past glory is much harder than figuring your way through to a new thing. And I think we're going to have to figure our way through to a new thing.
All right. We've got to move on. We've got some other topics to talk about here. I want to talk about leftist radicals who are advocating for violence. The Democratic candidate for Attorney General in Virginia apparently thinks that violence is the answer. National Review reported leaked texts showing that Democratic AG candidate Jay Jones fantasized about a GOP politician getting, quote, 2 bullets to the head. When the person he was texting complained, he apparently followed up by calling them to wish that the GOP politician's wife would be forced to watch their children die. When the person he was talking to pushed back, he reportedly said the Democratic AG candidate Jay Jones responded, "Yes, I've told you this before. Only when people feel pain personally do they move on policy. So, Nick, we've heard an awful lot recently about how the left has a real problem with radical violence, with excusing it or indulging it. I mean, this has become a line from Trump and people on the right in recent weeks. These are texts from a prominent Democratic candidate. Do they signal a deeper problem with political violence or the acceptance of political violence on the left?
No, I don't think so. And, you say a prominent member of the Democratic Party or whatever, like nobody outside of his family and maybe the people who the texts were talking about had heard of Jay Jones. He won his primary 51-49, a Democratic primary. I'm not minimizing what he said. It's gross, and it's the type of thing. If you want to be a politician and you're going to joke about killing your enemies or your opponents, make sure you're texting the right person. That's the biggest takeaway from this. But
I should also just interject here because it's not clear how much he was joking. It's again, he called this person. It might be, the report is presuming it's all this reporting is true. He called this person back to say, "No, I'm really serious. Yeah. I do want violence to happen because that is how you change policy." There's
a bunch of LOLs in the text messages themselves. I'm not defending him. I don't give a shit about Jay Jones. His career, I suspect, is over. Although Virginia is the state, if we remember, where a governor may have been in blackface or a Klan hood, and then he just stuck around and served his term out. And the AG, I believe it was the AG or the lieutenant governor who said, "You got to step down immediately." Then it turned out he had done blackface. And then the person under him, or the lieutenant governor, who was a black man, had been charged with sexual assault, and none of them stepped down. So, Jay Jones might become, the ruler of Virginia by the end of this election cycle. I don't know.
As a resident of Virginia, I want to say that I have never done blackface. I may be the only one.
Well, then
but there is at least one
qualified.
of us.
You're not qualified to be in office, plainly. Right?
No, I think that means that Eric has to run for governor.
But what I'm getting at is simply that every Democratic member of the Democratic Party that I've seen quoted, everybody's like, "Yeah, this is fucked up, and he should disappear." There are some Democrats who are saying things like this is a distraction, like we shouldn't pay attention to this. It might be, and the only way to get rid of it is to cashier Jay Jones, right? And this will almost certainly be the last time that we ever talk about Mr. Jay Jones. There are problems with political violence in the country. It is not clear that they are more right-wing or left-wing. Or Islamic, or, a variety of other things that people who track this stuff, the way that they categorize it. But it's clear that the Democratic Party is not supporting en masse. It is not a domestic terror, a domestic extremist organization that Stephen Miller says it is. This is bad. The guy should be gone. That's all.
Can we read his statement, to a different publication, because he would not answer questions from National Review, which originally reported this story. "Like all people, I've sent text messages that I regret." Buddy, I've sent text messages that I regret, but I have never just sent a text message wishing death on the children of my political opponent. Oh my God, like all people, this is not relatable.
Yeah, this is not, "Hey, what you doing? You
just want to have a beer with this
I saw
and talk
your
about
light
whose
was
children
on.
you're
I'm
going to
hoping
murder.
your children will be killed.
Let's also not overlook the reason he says the 2 bullets line is because it's a hypothetical where he has 2 bullets and the rest of the people in the lineup are history's greatest villains. He's reserved 2 bullets for his political opponents in the present day, and not for Mao.
Yeah,
like I said last week,
Pol Pot literally gets a pass in one of those scenarios. Yeah.
Like I said last week, American politics has a dipshit problem, and we see new evidence of it every single week. Speaking of which, hey, Eric, just want to check in on the government.
Wow.
It's still shut down, right? No. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Washington, because we've got this whole government thing and it's not doing anything, right? Give us just a brief check in here on the government shutdown. What does it mean besides a lot more day drinking for federal employees?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope they're enjoying it. It's been a lovely few days in DC too. It's like perfect early October weather, great day drinking weather. So enjoy it if you're the one federal employee listening to this podcast.
I am telling you, walking around on Friday and Saturday, like Friday afternoon, the bars were packed.
Yeah. So there's no rush to reopen the government, I think. And in fact, that's true. There doesn't seem to be much of a rush to reopen the government. I think my favorite anecdote in all of this is that like the headline that Politico had up as of sometime earlier this afternoon on Monday was, I don't know why this is so complicated, in quotes. And that was a quote from the Speaker of the House, Johnson, who was talking to reporters. I guess this was over the weekend. He said, I don't know why this is so complicated. Of course, he's kind of having a good time with this because the House passed the continuing resolution. All the drama is in the Senate. So that's the question of what's gonna move is gonna be what happens in the Senate. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of urgency at the moment. We talked last week, Peter, on a live stream here about how, we thought this would be over maybe by Friday, maybe by Monday. I think over the weekend, my thinking on this has really changed to where it seems like this might drag on for a little while because it really doesn't seem like either side is all that interested in putting an end to it. There are a couple of big deadlines coming up, which we should mention. A couple of things that may actually force some sort of compromise here. A lot of federal workers will miss their first paychecks on Friday. A lot of them are supposed to get paid this coming Friday. And then active duty military members will miss their first paycheck next Wednesday on the 15th when they're supposed to get paid. Yes, look, everybody gets back pay when the shutdowns end. This is not me saying we should have sympathy for federal workers or members of the military or anything like that. But those deadlines do create some sort of an impetus here, maybe, to get something done. And then on the other hand, the third hand perspective here would be that this 7-week continuing resolution, which is kind of hilarious anyway, right? That it's a 7-week continuing resolution that only takes you through like the middle of November. So as we get to, October 15th, maybe, or past that, does it seem even sillier to pass a continuing resolution that only funds the government till the middle of November? Does that mean that everybody has to go back to the drawing board and think about a longer term solution, which is absolutely what they should do, but makes all of this a lot more complicated? So I guess, I don't know what's going to happen. Your guess is as good as mine at the moment, but there is still no government. Although I wrote Amtrak in here today, so it's not as if the government shutdown actually means anything stops working. It was as close to on time as it normally is.
Or in the case of Amtrak, starts working.
Oh, yeah, right. It was only 10 minutes late. So
I do feel like in basically every meeting, I'm now going to just be channeling Mike Johnson. Like, I don't know why this is so complicated. Like, let's just, I get this feeling with my colleagues from time to time. It seems like sometimes things are harder than they need to be.
Wow, Katherine is just like, man, maybe the government should open. I'm not so worried about federal spending, and I relate to the Republican Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
What have you been consuming? We're going to find out later here. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to answer a listener question. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. October 10th is World Mental Health Day. This year, consider saying thank you, therapists. That's what BetterHelp is doing. It's shining the spotlight on therapists. These are people who truly make the world a better place because the right therapist can change everything. BetterHelp has quality therapists. They work according to a strict code of conduct. BetterHelp helps you connect with a therapist who fits your needs and your preferences. If you're not happy with your match, you can switch to a different therapist at any time. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform. It serves over 5 million people globally, and it works with an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a live session based on over 1.7 million client reviews. So this World Mental Health Day, we are celebrating the therapists who have helped millions of people take a step forward in their lives. If you are ready to find the right therapist for you, BetterHelp can help you start that journey. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/roundtable. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/roundtable. All right, this week's viewer question comes from Jonathan in Calgary, who writes, Nick often says we have never been freer. You do say that, Nick Gillespie. But that freedom comes with a trade-off because many people feel adrift, sometimes even drawn to extremes. Trump seems to gain support because he projects a sense of direction, while opponents, and especially libertarians with their focus on process over purpose, often seem to offer none. So does a society that prizes freedom but offers no shared direction leave people unmoored? And is that a problem for a philosophy that optimizes for freedom above all? Nick Gillespie, you were name-checked. Do libertarians have a problem with not giving people purpose?
Yeah, I'd say so. But it's a feature, not a bug. I'm curious what the other people think.
I mean, how is it a feature and also a problem?
It is, the idea of America, because that's really what we're talking about here. The idea of America is not that somebody like Donald Trump or FDR or Ronald Reagan comes along and then says, like, follow me, I've got a great idea, and this is the direction we're heading in. The whole point of America, it is the place where you get to direct your own life, you get to choose your own adventure, you get to build the world that you want to live in to the greatest degree possible. That is the genius, that's the beauty, that is the attraction, that's the selling point of America. And I do think there are times where people lose faith in that, and they feel like they're either disconnected from people, or the world is changing too fast and too much, and they can't deal with it. So they look for something that they can just take off the shelf in terms of meaning, community, purpose, rather than building it every day, which is what we have to do. And it's a lot of work. I've talked about this in the past as what I call the agony of abundance, that, we have so many options in front of us in ways that, we have more options than our parents had, than our grandparents had. We don't have as many options as our kids will have. And this is a fantastic thing, but it does require individuals who understand that and buy into that, and then work to figure out how to make meaning in your life. But I would also just suggest, to the writer, that there's a disconnect. People consistently say the country is going in the wrong direction, but they are happy with their own personal situation. And what I think libertarians can do is explain why you're happy with your own circumstance. And that's because you have more social freedom, more economic freedom, more intellectual freedom, more lifestyle freedom. And what we need to do is to build a coherent narrative, and an attractive one and a persuasive one, that makes people understand that if they feel all right about their lives, the world is going to be pretty good, because everybody else is going to be doing that, build the house you want to build on the prairie and attract people to it. That's the way we do it. And it's not an individual thing, it's a community thing. But we need to be doing that better than we have been.
Katherine, do libertarians have a problem with not giving people purpose in this world?
I just don't think people should look for purpose in politics. That's it. That's the whole thing. Like, I am a
but people
practitioner
do.
of
I mean, this is the thing,
right.
is that, like,
Or
politicians...
it's not necessarily,
it's not even...
politics sucks up the space when people feel like their life is meaningless.
I think that the notion that people are in search of meaning, and that other political philosophies do a better job of jumping in to fill that void is totally accurate. But I think that the real goal is to leave a void and let people fill it with meaningful things to them. And some of those things are going to suck. And sometimes the things they fill it with are going to feel backlashy and confusing and disorienting. But it is still better than filling the void of meaning with a top-down answer.
But isn't that what happens when you have a political philosophy that says figure it out on your own? You end up with, I don't know, entrepreneurs, whether you want to call them grifters or whether you think of them as leaders, right? Who say, this is your purpose. I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to deliver it through democratic politics. Like,
you end up with that no matter
a
what.
risk of leaving it up to people?
But that is what happens if politicians are the relevant grifters, or if entrepreneurs are relevant grifters. Like, there will always be someone who is here to offer you meaning. And I would at least like for that someone who is offering you meaning to not be mandating that meeting. That's the best we can do.
Eric, does freedom not give us meaning?
No, freedom means you get to choose your own meaning, right? Like, I am just going to say the same thing that these two said, but like, that's the point of the whole thing, is that you be the void, embrace the void, and then find something to fill it with if you want. That's great. I just want to like take a little issue.
I choose carbohydrates.
Yeah, just to not like repeat all of everything that's been said so far.
A bumper sticker that says "Be the void." Reason.
I would put that on my laptop. I think a slightly different take here would be just to say that I sort of take a little bit of issue with the question itself, that like Trump is giving people direction. I don't know that is even right. Like, I think Trump kind of is grasping at a weird kind of nationalism in some of his political views. And I think people are so desperate for that kind of tribalist, nationalist thing that it's working. But I don't really get the sense that Trump is giving people direction in their lives. At least I certainly hope that's not true. Like he doesn't.
Well, the idea is that people are rallying around him as a strongman character who creates a cult of
what is Trump's goal though? Right, his goal
but he
seems
creates
to be
a cult
mostly
of personality
to
who makes them feel like their lives are worthwhile. Right, you see this at the Trump rallies where there is just this sort of intensity, this kind of fandom around him.
Yeah, but you'll see that at a Phish concert
Yeah, you'll see that at a rock concert or at a sporting event. Like there's any number of places.
President of the United States.
Yeah, no. But what I'm saying is,
I think
no
one who has that sort of following should be either. Like that's the problem.
But I think you're over-indexing for Trump fans are like, oh yeah, he's really giving them meaning, but they're not a majority of the country, right? And he can do a lot of damage. This is the whole point of limited government, and pushing for limited government is to put in guardrails so that a politician does not force other people to live in particular ways. I will go back, and there's also people on the left, like if you go to Brooklyn, which I do on occasion and always under distraction, Zoran Mamdani, who's going to be the next mayor, unless, something really weird happens. A lot of young people are like, okay, I'm on his bandwagon. This is going to give us meaning. We are like making generational change here. And then when you start to ask, what does that mean? It gets a little bit fuzzy, but what we need to be doing, I think, as libertarians is saying that, politics is not the realm of freedom. Politics is the realm of coercion. And that's why we want it to be as small a part of our lives as possible. But one of the ways that you do that is by talking about how free we are in a historical context, and what are the opportunities and also what are the responsibilities for that? Because it's hard. If younger people and older people alike are being sold narratives of absolute decline. You will never own a house. You will never, be able to have your wife stay at home and have 16 kids and, be able to buy a week's worth of groceries on $20. All of those weird things, or old people who are talking about how like things were so much easier in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, which is just wrong. Like we need to be selling a vision of freedom where things keep getting better. And one of the reasons they keep getting better is because what you want at any given point in time changes. And in a free society, you're able to recreate yourself and the world around you with much more flexibility.
All right. Speaking of charismatic politicians and a vision of freedom where things keep getting better, hopefully, let's talk about Javier Milei and Argentina. We're kind of bailing them out. Offering them a $20 billion line of credit because of some of the currency issues they've had. Katherine Mangu-Ward, I see all over people saying, hey, isn't libertarianism supposed to be against bailouts? Doesn't this prove that libertarianism is wrong? Does it?
I'm against bailouts. Bailouts are bad. I am also utterly heartbroken to report that there's a very sensible take on this whole thing, which is David Frum in The Atlantic. So his piece on this, which basically says, like, listen,
Katherine, did you hire anti-Katherine to fill in for you on the podcast this week?
Times, but hear me out. Okay,
this is negative Katherine, bizarro
David
Katherine.
Frum's piece explains that there is kind of this, there is basically a slush fund that is used for very specifically this type of bailout. It is sort of like a rotating fund. It does tend to get paid back. We've used it in the past to support other countries when they get themselves in currency trouble. And that, yes, Milei absolutely should have let the peso devalue to market levels. He didn't. He kind of wavered and kept this sort of cronyist and complicated system in place a little too long. He did that wrong. It would be great to live in a world where there isn't a U.S.-backed Federal Reserve currency slush fund thing that's all complicated. But given that we live in that world, this bailout does not seem like the worst of all the bailouts. And it might give a chance for this thing to pay off. Still, to be clear, I would rather live in a world where Argentina has to handle its own business by itself and the U.S. is not involved. Given the world we actually live in, this is like the smallest infraction of libertarian orthodoxy you can imagine as a bailout goes.
All right, Nick, I just want to ask you, what do you think of this generally, but even more specifically, isn't this kind of like TARP, which was a bailout in a moment of crisis that did, in the end, basically get repaid?
No, I mean, TARP did more damage to the American economy and to the American polity, I think, long term than it helped in any way, shape, or form. I understand why Milei is asking for a bailout. And I also kind of understand why Trump is giving it, both as a gesture of solidarity between a world leader he likes, and also because some of his supporters also stand to benefit from a bailout of the Argentine economy. But I think that this bailout is a bad idea. If we shouldn't have bailed out Mexico during the Clinton years, we shouldn't be doing. Argentina is a much less important ally to us economically, politically, et cetera. I agree with Katherine that the From article makes the best case for it. There's a Paul Krugman article that makes a good case against it. So it's worlds are colliding.
Big fight.
But Steve Hanke of Johns Hopkins, who's a very good free market economist, talks about how bailouts like this, particularly to countries like Argentina, are always bad because they never actually change anything structurally. And all that happens is that the money that gets sent down there leaves the country through a back door. And, it is just a waste of money. I think this is a bad deal. I don't think that we should do it. It would be one thing if Trump wanted to pull together a bunch of other people who would, countries or the IMF or even the World Bank or something like that, and said, okay, these are the terms in which you get some support for this kind of stuff. Milei is great. He's doing a lot of important things. This was a mistake, that got him into this situation, and it's a political problem, but it doesn't mean that the U.S. should be bailing him out.
All right, this is just such a strange podcast this week. I feel like I got to do some Star Wars references and some puns just to get us back to the baseline. But instead, we're going to go to our final segment. What have you been consuming in the cultural arena? Eric, let's start with you.
Well, somebody had to talk about the new Taylor Swift album, right? So I guess I'll do that.
The most important news of the week.
The most important news of the week.
You, Eric. Go ahead.
I'll admit to being a fan. I've not paid the billions of dollars to go see her in concert, but I am a big fan. And so I listened to this new album on Friday while I was in the car, and gave it a second listen on Sunday while I was in the car again. And I don't know. I don't
there
love
a
it.
third listen?
There was not, and there will not be a third all the way through listen. I promise you that. I think the main problem that Life of a Showgirl has is that we just know what Taylor Swift is capable of doing, right? The run of albums that she put out between 2012 when Red came out and the two pandemic albums, Folklore and Evermore, is phenomenal. All 6 of those are somewhere between outstanding and very good. They each had big hits, but they were also tight and cohesive and around a theme of sorts, and they were all so good. The songwriting was fantastic and very mature, especially the two pandemic albums. And nothing she's done since then has quite hit that level. And that's kind of where this one is too. This is the third one she's put out that's just sort of middling. This one at least isn't as bloated or long. It's only 40 minutes long, which is really nice compared to the last 2. But it just is, I don't know. It doesn't quite hit the songwriting highs from her earlier work. There is some really cool stuff in here. So I'll mention a couple things I really liked. Fate of Ophelia has this funk influence with the bass line and the drums and stuff that's really cool. Opalite is an ABBA song, but in a good way. Elizabeth Taylor has this really cool Baroque piano chord that runs through it over and over again. The production stuff here is really good. She worked with these 2 Swedish producers who have made all sorts of big pop albums through the years, and that's all really, really wonderful. Ruin the Friendship sort of sounds like one of the songs from the pandemic albums if you squint a little bit, but overall it just kind of seems immature. That's the word I keep coming back to, and it's just sort of fine. I guess the libertarian angle on this is that one of the worst songs on the album is this song called Canceled, in all caps with an exclamation point at the end. Just very cringy. It's a great example of why the whole album is just a little bit immature and falls short. Did you girl boss too close to the sun is a real line in this song. Written by someone with the songwriting skills of Taylor Swift. It's a real swing and a miss. But I guess there's some conclusion here. If we have to draw some sort of cultural thing out of this, we could say that even Taylor Swift, who no one would confuse for some sort of right-wing frat bro, is now sort of laughing and winking at the idea of cancel culture. And beware the wrath of masked crusaders is another line in this song. Maybe she's throwing shade at ICE, but I think this is probably just about how mobs online have lost their power. We are very much in 2025. It is no longer 2020, which means Taylor Swift is not making cool indie rock albums anymore, which is a real bummer, but it also means that cancel culture is dead. So I guess we have to take the trade-off.
Yeah, like American politics, Taylor Swift seems stuck. And I think so much of our political and cultural moment just goes back to COVID. We are still living in the shadow of 2020. Katherine, you want to girl boss us back to earth?
I do want to note the phrase "girl boss too close to the sun" pre-exists this album. That is a thing people on the internet say. So she's just quoting that line. I don't know if that makes it better or worse.
That makes it worse. Yeah.
I read The Naturalist Society by Carrie Vaughn. It was one of those, you guys get those emails every month if you're a Prime member that's like, hey, you want one of these books? And it's always just like a really random assortment of 6 books. So I said, sure, I'll take this one. It has birds on the cover. And it's pretty good. It is a novel of kind of Victorian era taxonomists and naturalists, and it has a very light magic overlay. So there's a magical system that is based on the work of Linnaeus, and it has this kind of like, if you can name the thing, you can like borrow its powers. And it asks the question, like, what would happen if you lived in that world? And then Darwin rolls up and says, naming things is false and things are always in flux. And you can never capture the power of a thing because things do not have permanent natures. And like that's actually a pretty cool philosophical premise for a fairly light novel. There is a threesome in it, so I do want to not send the confusing message about how serious this book is. There is also toward the end a Sazian takeaway of the ways in which we incarcerate people perceived to be socially different or potentially mentally ill. So all in all, a surprise win for a random book that Amazon thought I might like in my monthly email, The Naturalist Society by Carrie Vaughn.
I have a lot of questions, and I am not going to ask them. Instead, I am just going to say Nick Gillespie and wonder that if I name you, can I borrow your powers?
Based on the 2 things that we've heard so far, it just reminds me
imagine
that
what you're about to
Kesha, at least on Spotify and a bunch of podcasts, Kesha is doing ads for the app Field, which is for like open cultures. And it seems to me to be the most perfect pairing of a celebrity and the product she's pitching, since George Kennedy did Breath Assure breath mints. And somehow you guys made me think of that. I read Jake Tapper's new book, Race Against Terror, Chasing an Al-Qaeda Killer at the Dawn of the Forever War, which is a fantastic book that goes on sale tomorrow. It is about a character who became known to American terrorist investigators as Spin Ghoul, who was an Al-Qaeda operative who was arrested in Italy in 2011 and confessed to killing a bunch of Americans, and there was no way to actually verify that he had done this. And so 2 investigators had to go and figure out where he might have done this in order to bring him to trial. And he was tried in criminal court rather than in military court. And it's a fantastic book. Tapper, among many other things, is like a phenomenal writer. And this is like a police procedural. It's like a thriller novel. And what is most fascinating about it to think about at this late date is that it ultimately makes the case that the real success of the war on terror was not getting all of the bad guys by indiscriminately bombing whole countries, particularly Afghanistan, but rather by coming back to things like rule of law and actually making cases against specific individuals for acts that they had committed and going through the legal process that America had worked to build up over centuries, really. So I highly recommend it. It's a Race Against Terror, and it is a look at the way that we came out of the war on terror in a way that there are lessons that we can learn there, and they are generally not the ones that are being promulgated by, somebody like Pete Hegseth, when he does his infomercial and telling all of the assembled generals to lose a couple of pounds and shave closer, or other people who are saying, what we really need is a war where we invade and occupy more countries and try and do regime change.
All right. So I read the novel Muscle Man by Jordan Castro, this novel that has been getting a lot of attention as a sort of key to the manosphere, to kind of right-wing masculinity. I'm not sure it's actually about that. Jordan Castro himself has said, I don't know, guys, I'm not so sure it's about that. But Castro is a deputy director of a kind of an arts think tank at the Catholic University of America, sort of an interesting guy, I think not a kind of conventional lefty in a lot of ways, and has talked about the way that the publishing industry has, maybe not been interested in men's stories and in male stories. But what I like about this is that it is not just a novel that is kind of trying to play into and elevate or sort of it's not even just trying to explain the male psyche. It's trying to dig into something and then tweak it, make fun of it. There is a kind of cynicism. There is a sort of very funny kind of distance here, because this whole book, is about a professor at a small liberal arts college, and he's a weightlifter. He is also absolutely terrifyingly and hilariously neurotic. The entire novel takes place over a course of a few hours in an afternoon, but mostly it's just in his head. And he worries and he judges and he worries about being judged by absolutely everything and everyone else. There's just like long disquisition about a woman in his department who sometimes speaks with a Southern accent and sometimes doesn't, and whether or not she's messing with him and whether it's all a front and whether this is like the real problem with women. And of course, you understand that this is his problem, right? And if you were reading this the correct way with a kind of ironic distance, you understand that it is all his problem and his inability to relate to the world. And the very best part of it that Katherine will love, because this is a book about men and what's up with men, right? Because there's always got to be another one, is that from time to time, in his head monologue, he imagines himself on a podcast. And the whole thing is just him imagining what he would say to someone about his situation and about his thoughts on the world on a podcast if he were on one right now. It's kind of glorious. It's kind of glorious, and I kind of felt a little bit seen, but it's very funny, very sharply observed. It's also only like 250 pages. You can read this in a couple of hours in an evening. This is Muscle Man by Jordan Castro.
Hell is other people's podcasts.
Disorienting experiences I've ever had in my life was when somebody pointed out to me that I am a podcaster. I was like, no, that can't be right.
You're a podcast bro.
There you go.
Oh, no.
Lift Bros, Podcast Bros, we got them all here. All right, we will bring our Lift Bros and Podcast Bros back next week. As always, if you like this podcast, you can give us your money. Please go to reason.com/donations. Please go to reason.com/donate to give us your money and support everything we do here at Reason. The Reason Roundtable will return.
What you're